Hey, my name is Pastor Sunil, and welcome to our archive messages. You can join us on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. in person or catch us live online. We hope that you're truly blessed by this message, and once again, thanks for tuning in.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
Good morning. So, how did you do? Did you get the number of passes right? Nobody. Okay, so did you see the moonwalking bear? Oh, some of you did. Well, this study, along with our results this morning, have shown that it's easy to miss something that you weren't looking for. There have been a number of different awareness studies that have been done over the years, and I found this next one both amusing and a little alarming. It's the clown on a unicycle test. There were a group of researchers at a Washington University who decided to study whether talking on a cell phone was so distracting that people wouldn't notice the obvious events that happened in the world around them. They theorized that people engrossed in a phone call had what's called inattentional blindness, meaning that they're looking at their surroundings as they talk, but none of it registered. So this is what happened. A student dressed in a purple and yellow clown costume with polka dots, red shoes, and a red nose hopped onto a unicycle, and he began pedaling around a square for about an hour. After pedestrians crossed the square, the researchers stopped the walkers and asked, "Did you see anything unusual?" And these were the results. Among pedestrians who were listening to music or walking alone, 1 in 3 mentioned that they had seen a clown on a unicycle. Nearly 60% of people who were walking with a friend mentioned the clown. But among the people who were talking on a cell phone, only 8% remembered the clown. On a side note, don't talk on your cell and drive. The chances of being in that 8% are pretty slim. You guys want to smile at me this morning? Hey, nice smiles. Okay, here we go. You may be saying, I don't need a test to tell me about inattentional blindness. I may not know the term inattentional blindness, but I know what it's all about. The obvious isn't always that obvious with my spouse or my kids. How many times have you heard this? Honey, I can't find my socks. Yeah. Or Mom, where are my socks? Yeah. And you reply, they're next to your underwear. And they respond, no, they're not. So you walk to the dresser, right to the socks, and you hold them up. The obvious isn't always that obvious. Let's read our text for this morning, reading from Luke chapter 5, verses 12 to 16. How about we all stand together and read it together? While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word this morning. Your word is fresh every time we open it, Father God. It is a living word, and it is a word that is in due season spoken to our heart, Father. And I believe, Lord, that this word this morning is meant for such a time as this. So I pray that you would give us ears to hear and eyes to see. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. You may be seated. Okay, this might be a familiar passage of scripture to some of you, so regardless if you've heard this many times before or if this is a first time, my hope is that you're going to relate with someone in this passage, and as we unpack and explore it, that you will see in a fresh new way that Jesus cares for those others avoided. Jesus wants to care for you. Jesus wants you to care for others. Preparing for this morning, I decided to insert myself in the story as if it was being narrated by Luke, and I stood unseen, unheard in the background, not too far away, and I was observing the townspeople as most likely they were interacting, and I was watching Jesus, all of it, as it unfolded before me. Now, on another side note, I thought it really would be cool if we could actually do this. Okay, so Jesus is in a town. Luke doesn't give any details about the town, so my assumption is there's nothing unusual or outstanding about it. There's nothing noteworthy about this town. This already seems to me like the perfect setting for a miracle to take place. Jesus steps into a nothing special kind of place, and he turns someone's mourning into dancing. Now, some of you out there, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, because Jesus has entered your ordinary, nothing special, nothing extraordinary kind of life, and he's done the same for you. Back to my story. Okay, I envision as I'm peering from my hiding place, some kids that are running and laughing. There's some adults wandering in conversation, and there's some dogs, stray dogs that are barking, and kids crying in the background. Can you hear it? Can you see it? Are you getting into this story? Can you kind of see it? Okay, and there's some kids that are crying in the background, and of course, there's some bright white clothes that are being hung outside to dry in that hot sun. And I don't think that this is really any stretch of the imagination. So Jesus enters the scene. Wait a minute, we forgot someone. Somewhere in the scene is a leper. Where Luke didn't think it necessary to give details about the town, he does give us some information about the leper. He narrates Jesus met a man with an advanced case of leprosy. That's the New Living Translation. The New International Version says, a man comes along who is covered with leprosy. Now, leprosy was the most feared, most dreaded disease of the ancient world. It was the worst imaginable condition. It was horribly disfiguring. And contrary to belief, limbs didn't fall off. They were actually worn away, open sores. Besides his physical condition, this leper was religiously isolated as he couldn't go to church. He was socially isolated as he had to keep away from people. He was economically isolated as he couldn't work. So, no family, no job, no friends, no worship, no hope. We can only imagine the horror when this man noticed that first discolored, numb patch of skin. I found myself wondering, did he keep it to himself, observing if there would be any changes, or did he share it with a wife or with a mother? Did worry keep him up at night? He knew what it meant if the priest confirmed his worst fear. And the priest would have, in fact, declared this leper unclean, and his life did become his worst nightmare. It's a fact that he would have had to have walked away from everyone he loved, leaving behind a job, a family, friends. This man has lost his family and friends, and they have lost him. We don't live in a vacuum. What affects our lives affects others as well. We think of this man, but what about his loved ones and his friends? They too had to deal with a tremendous loss. Kevin and I have been married for 33 years, and we've shared thousands of memories. Some of them were insignificant events at the time, but they've turned out to be some of the warmest memories. There are some sad ones mixed with some good ones. Some of these memories weren't pleasant in the making, but now we can laugh about it. And I have a couple to share. I had one. It was a summer story, and about a hot summer. And since we've been experiencing that, I think I'm going to skip it, and I'm going to go to the winter, which some of you probably are hoping for just about now. But this is a wonderful memory. One Boxing Day, our family decided to take a family skiing trip. Now, we're not a skiing type family, and I don't like the cold at all. So can you see where this is going? Okay, so we make our way up to Barrie, and everyone was skiing except for me. I was in the chalet reading a book. It was a real wonderful memory. And at some point in the afternoon, I heard my name over the intercom to go to first aid. And I'm going, oh my goodness, what kid hurt themselves? Well, it happened to be the big kid, Kevin. He fell and not only broke his leg, he actually shattered it. And some of you have been part of that journey with us. And if that wasn't bad enough, I don't do highways. I don't drive highways. Did you know that you have to drive a highway to get home from Barrie to Welland? Well, I refuse to drive. That's how paralyzing it is for me. And I insisted that Kevin drive home with his broken leg. I did insist. However, he said no. So I made our son, who had just got his license, to drive home. Now, I was terrified that this new driver was driving home on the 400, so I kept pleading for Kevin to sit in the front seat with him while we were going home. Well, he couldn't because he had to extend his leg in the back. So, so Stephen did get us home safely, and everything is fine now. So it was a bad memory at the time. It was very stressful for me, but it turned out to be okay. Now, I have one more story I have to share. My granddaughters knew that I was going to be speaking this morning, and they said to me, and just recently, Toby, just a day or so ago, said, "Grandma, are you going to talk about us when you talk at the church?" So I might extend this message by 2 minutes, but I can't disappoint my grandkids, so I have to put another story in there about them. We have 3 married children, and we have 3 grandchildren. And the whole family, all 11 of us, every Sunday get together for family lunch. And the house gets loud. Now, I mean really loud, like Italian loud. And if you don't have Italians in your life, you don't know the level of loud that is. Just hang around a bit and you'll know. So the house gets really loud and it gets really messy. I sometimes try out new recipes. I did not inherit the cooking gene from my mother. So often those recipes just don't work out. And there's lots of squealing and noise happening, and when everyone leaves, it looks like the aftermath of a tornado. Do you know what I mean, grandparents? You know what I'm talking about? But I wouldn't have it any other way, right? We wouldn't. So the point I'm trying to make, besides just talk about my family, is that we make memories with people, with our families, our friends, our coworkers. We even make memories about the neighbors with the weird quirks. You got some of those in your life? Or maybe the family members with the weird quirks. So, can we even perceive the anguish and the grief that the leper felt as he walked away, leaving everyone and everything behind? Going forward, he would only have his memories. And that goes for those he left behind. They were losing a dad or a son or a brother. Maybe you too this morning can relate with the leper or his family. You too have suffered tremendous loss. You may have experienced heartache and feel alone and isolated, and life has left you bruised. God gives a beautiful pictures in the words of Isaiah, where he wrote in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 3, "A bruised reed he will not break." The Message Bible says he won't brush aside the bruised and the hurt, and he won't disregard the small and insignificant, but he'll steadily and firmly set things right. Okay, I'm a visual person, so when I read this, I envisioned some kids playing soccer in the backyard. And inevitably, the ball ends up in Mom's flower garden. And as this child is going to retrieve this ball, Mom's prized hydrangea gets trampled on. And maybe the family dog or the ball had something to do with this as well. But this beautiful pink bloom is hanging by a thread, but it's not broken off. It's hanging on to the stem. Sometimes life tramples over us. I envision Mom tenderly propping up that bruised plant and caring for it. And Jesus does the same for us. He isn't going to kick you when you're down. He isn't going to leave you broken and bruised. When we are crushed and we're barely holding on, he tenderly props us up and steadily and firmly sets things right. The Apostle Paul knew very well what it felt like to be bruised and battered, and he also knew that it wouldn't keep him down. He writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." A few verses later, Paul writes in verse 18, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporal, but what is unseen is eternal." Now, this leper we've been talking about, we have to remember he isn't just a character in a book that we're reading. He was a real person. He had a name. He had a family. He lived a life. This man would have been humbled and humiliated over and over again. He may now be a beggar where once he was a productive member of society. And he broadcasts his leprosy whenever in the proximity of people shouting unclean. But today wasn't going to be like any other day. He must have had a glimmer of hope when he saw Jesus. He obviously knew who he was, and maybe he had seen him perform a miracle or had heard. We know this by his response when he sees Jesus. He makes his way to him, and he falls with his face to the ground, and he declares the truth. "If you are willing, you can make me clean." It wasn't going to end like every other day. Jesus did the unexpected. Jesus did the unthinkable. Jesus touched the man who was untouchable because of his illness. Instead of keeping his distance as law required, Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. I find myself wondering, how long had it been since this man had human interaction and actually felt a loving touch? And I wondered how long since someone had actually looked him in the eyes. I wish I could actually have been in that scene and see the look that compassion Jesus had as he looked at him in the eyes. We mentioned the leper having his memories, and I'm sure some of those memories had to include some hugs and kisses from some loved ones. And I'm guessing the last meaningful look he had in someone's eyes included a few tears when he walked away, leaving behind his loved ones. And now he only had those memories. But however long ago it was, Jesus gives a healing, compassionate touch. Now, this is a word for you, so listen up here. Today isn't going to be like any other day for you. Today isn't going to end like every other day. Maybe you didn't come expecting anything at all. Or maybe you came this morning like that leper, and you have been saying, as you've been worshiping, as you've been praying, "Jesus, if you're willing, you can make me clean." This leper found his new way of living after he laid down his life before Jesus. This leper in Luke chapter 5 broke all protocol. seems without any thought of consequences, and he throws himself at Jesus' feet. Oh, that we would be like that leper, unreserved, without any thought of what others would say, and lay our life down before Jesus. It's here in Jesus' presence that there is an immense love that does not measure, it only gives. There are 2 healings of leprosy recorded in the book of Luke. This one in Luke chapter 5, and there's a healing of the 10 lepers recorded in Luke 17. As you might remember, the 10 lepers stood in a distance and they cried out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." They did this in keeping with the law, and they kept their distance. And you may also remember that one came back to humble himself and thank Jesus for his healing. Oh, that we would be like the one that returns and gives thanks, not forgetting what Jesus has done for us. So what does that mean to lay our life down before Jesus? Surrendering. Surrendering is not just at salvation. This is something that we have to do daily. Jesus must be Savior and Lord. We recently finished the series Cross Training, and that should have challenged us to lay down our selfish ways and live in a way that demonstrates the way Jesus lived, which is the fruit of the Spirit. And you'll remember them, and if you want to repeat them with me, this is some good practice. Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, meekness, kindness, goodness, faith. Now, if that's not a daily surrender of our own way, I really don't know what is. The series that we're in now, The Way, should be moving us to action to lay down our life, our way, and follow in Jesus' way. As we get towards the end of Luke's narrative in the healing of the leper, Luke records in verse 15 and 16, "Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed." When I read this, the word "but" in verse 16, it just stood out to me like a flashing neon sign. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So this is what's unfolding. People are hearing about Jesus and these words of life that he's giving, and people are being healed, and they're coming to hear what he has to say. And the sick are coming to be healed, and the scripture says, but he withdrew to a place to be with the Father. That really stood out to me. Now, here's a word for you bleeding hearts out there, and I can really relate to you because I consider myself a bleeding heart. You are already out there. You're already seeing the needs, and you are volunteering, and you're making meals, and you're helping drive the neighbor kids. And the more you do, the more you see. And sometimes you're feeling exhausted, but you keep doing. You're there because you're needed. There are needs, and they need you. And if you don't do it, you feel guilty. You need to follow in the way of Jesus and care for yourself. Even in the midst of needs, he withdrew to be with the Father. True compassion comes from a life that has spent time with the Father. I want to repeat that again. If sometimes you're wondering, where I don't know, that's not in me. I don't know. I can't see it. True compassion comes from a life that has spent time with the Father. Over the last number of weeks, we've been looking at the way Jesus lived his life, the way he interacted with people, so we can pattern our lives after him. Now, as I was just going over this again last night, a story popped into my head, and I want to share it with you about how to pattern your life after someone. My mom, for those of you that might know, is a seamstress. And she's actually a very good seamstress. Back in the long time ago, back in the day. I was trying not to say back in the day. I never realized I said back in the day a lot until it was pointed out to me, and it's like, oh, I really do say that. But back in the day, she used to sew for people. She sewed, and she would make clothes without a pattern. People would draw a picture or even explain what they wanted, and she was able to make what they wanted. But that's not where it started. She tells stories, and I remember as a little girl hearing these stories that she started her career as a seamstress back in Italy. And every single day, she would go to the seamstress. And every single day, she did nothing but sit there and watch the seamstress as she sewed. She would do this day after day. I forgot to ask her if that became frustrating or not. Was that frustrating or no? No, she's saying it wasn't frustrating. So every day she would go and observe what the seamstress was doing. And then little by little, the seamstress would give her something to do. Till at the end, she became this accomplished seamstress. So as I was looking at that, what I was just saying, that popped into my mind, and I thought, that's it. We need to every day sit in the presence of the Master and observe. How do we do that? We observe the way as we're reading his way. So we're observing and we pattern our life after him. We are called Christians. The word Christ is in that word, in the word Christians. We follow the way of Christ, and I think that sometimes we leave those around us either confused or disappointed as to who Jesus is. Ouch. I believe the church sometimes has inattentional blindness. And when I say the church, I mean ourselves as individuals, as Christians, across the city, in this church, across the country and around the world. I mean the church as a corporate group of people. Now, you'll remember the meaning of inattentional blindness, looking at our surroundings, but it's not registering. We are sometimes so engrossed in our own lives that often we're not aware of our surroundings. It's like that awareness test. We can be so focused at making a living, paying the bills, making the mortgage payments, house renovation, family trips, extracurricular activities, exhausted at the end of the day, only to get up the next day and do it all over again, that we completely miss the bear or the leper in the middle of it all. Now, I'm not suggesting that we neglect our families or our responsibilities. This is our first responsibility. Timothy addresses the issue of taking care of our families in 1 Timothy chapter 5. Starting to read at verse 4, "But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and their grandparents, for this is pleasing to God." A few verses later, he says, in verse 8, "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Just this morning, I was looking at this again, and something again popped into my head, and it's like, no, I'm not going to say that. So I wasn't going to say it. It just popped in my head again. I was like, I better say it. Okay, so let me read this again. "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Some of you need to hear that word this morning, especially the bleeding hearts. And I have been there before. I've been there where I have been cooking meals for other people and have neglected my own family doing for others. So you need to hear that. Your family is your first responsibility. Your family is your first priority. Now, that's a strong statement, what I just read. If we're neglecting our family responsibilities, we are actually denying our faith, and we are worse than an unbeliever. Like, I don't know how that strikes you, but when I read it and keep reading it, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like you're denying the faith and you're worse than an unbeliever. So it's clear you do not neglect your first priority. But what I am saying is we need to refocus in the middle of this thing that we call life. The bear is there right in the middle, and we miss him. The needs are all around us, and often we're walking right past them. If I were to ask you this morning, who is the modern day leper, what would you respond? There is one thing that defined him: isolation. So, who is the modern day leper? Who is the isolated one? Now, I'm pretty sure we would hear some of the ones that we always hear, the alcoholic, the drug addict, the homeless, and this is true. We need to reach out to them and tell them that Jesus offers an immense love that does not measure. It's unconditional and it's transformational. But even being focused on this, we can still miss out on the countless other isolated people we walk by every single day. Now, I dare say that the townspeople in Luke chapter 5 had become so accustomed to lepers and their cry of unclean that it became commonplace. Can it be that we've become so accustomed to our surroundings that it's become so commonplace that we don't see the opportunities before us to show compassion to the people that we rub shoulders with every day? Could it be that maybe, just maybe, we're like the one walking across the square and didn't even notice the clown? Here's a list of some people you may not see. Niagara College had about 10,000 students enrolled in the 2015-2016 year. 2,300 of them were international students that came to our city, literally our backyard, from all over the world. They've come from China and Brazil. They're here from South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and the Russian Federation. These young adults are isolated from their families, their friends, their culture, their language. And many others have left their hometowns across Canada to attend Niagara College. 234 students lived at the Welland residence this past year. Here is one student's story. When I first came to Canada, I was terrified. Oh, sorry, I need a drink. It was a new country, a new language. I left my family in my home country and I didn't have friends. I felt lost. I tried to focus on the new things that I could learn. I had to find something to occupy my mind, so I focused in helping people by volunteering in anything that I could help. I started to help the new students that came to study at Niagara College. I started to build connections with a lot of people, but the most important one was with Jesus. I started to go to church, and there I met people that I will carry in my heart for the rest of my life. The largest growing demographic in our area is seniors. Although this stat is a little outdated, the 2011 census revealed Welland having a population of 9,340 adults over the age of 65. A lot of these seniors are living on a fixed income. Many are lonely. A number of them don't drive. Many of them are confined to their care facilities or their homes and spend day after day with no interaction with other people. It's not unusual for seniors to rely on bus transportation to get appointments or to do their groceries. They start out hours before their scheduled appointment as they have to make several bus transfers. Add a walker to be maneuvered through slush and snow in and out of buses. And if they're doing groceries, managing the walker in slush while carrying groceries and climbing in and out of buses is challenging. Wouldn't you agree? Now, this is a true story that was told to me by a senior. I recently followed a conversation with some moms of young children, and unanimously they said that they had little to no adult conversation every day. Their days were filled with household responsibilities and caring for their preschoolers. Although they didn't resent what they were doing, they craved adult interaction. One mom said, "It gets really lonely, alone all the time." While another one responded, "Oh, so true. Hubby is on shift work and I don't drive, so I have become a Facebook junkie. It's my only chance to talk to big people. Even then, sometimes I wonder." This is a true conversation. So these moms are living in our neighborhoods. They may be someone in your family, or they might be someone sitting next to you in church. Every neighborhood has the isolated living in homes that look just like yours and mine. The one that's too sick to leave their house. The young family where both parents are struggling and stressing to make ends meet. Or the single parent that's doing double duty. Or the one that has extreme anxiety that they're so paralyzed they can't even step outside their door. I think the refugee may best represent the ancient leper. And I don't mean that disrespectfully when I use the word leper, but remember the word isolation. Many are afraid to get close to them. In fact, many are living in fear knowing that they are living in our neighborhoods and they're attending our schools. For everyone that I've mentioned, I know that there's 1 or 2 or 10 others that can be considered. And I'm just as sure that if we all put our heads together, that we can find ways to reach out to these people. I really did expect an applause there. That's okay, I'll take it. Okay. Interestingly, 60% of the people that were walking through the square with a friend saw the clown on a unicycle, where the stats of the one walking alone were considerably lower. We are more apt to see the needs around us when we are sharing life with others. The more involved we are in our schools or our workplace, our neighborhoods, our church, the more aware we will be of the needs. If you aren't tuned in to those that are sitting around you while your kids are playing soccer, or the other moms that are standing beside you every day as you're waiting for your kids to get out of school, you're missing it. If you're avoiding the kid sitting next to you in math class, or you don't include the kids sitting alone at lunch, you're missing it. Now I'm going to get a little bit closer to home. If you don't know the person that's sitting in front of you at church, or behind you or beside you, I'm afraid to say you're missing it. I may be stepping on a few toes this morning, but it needs to be said. You will never be aware of the needs around you and how desperate people are for hope, for peace of mind, or for a Savior if you don't get out there and interact with people. That's the not-so-secret formula. Like the old Nike commercial says, just do it. Jesus did not avoid people who were used to being avoided. I'm going to say that again. Jesus did not avoid people who were used to being avoided. You may recall the story of Jesus meeting a different kind of leper of the day, a Samaritan. You can read the whole story in John chapter 4. Now, there's a whole new message that can be preached here, but this is just a little abridged version. As you know, the Jews and the Samaritans avoided each other. So Jesus and his disciples are going through Samaria, and it was noon, and it was hot. I think we can all relate to that with the summer we've had, going outside in that stifling heat at noon, when the sun is the highest. So he has been walking in that for some time, and he gets to Jacob's well, and he's hot, he's tired, he's thirsty. The disciples went into town to get some food, and a Samaritan woman comes to draw water from the well. Now, this woman not only avoided Jews, She came to the well at noon, the hottest time of the day, when nobody is outside. They're having their little siesta. She comes at noon because she's avoiding the other townspeople. Now, the disciples are on their way back with lunch when they see Jesus from a distance. Now, I can just picture this as well. I was like, I think there's someone sitting with them. Who's he talking to? And as they're getting closer, they're noticing he's talking to a woman, a Samaritan woman. And I can't say it better than this. In verse 27, Luke says, just then his disciples came back and they were shocked. They couldn't believe that he was talking with that kind of woman. No one said what they were thinking, but their faces showed it. Jesus did not avoid the people who were used to being avoided. And we know how that story unfolds because of that, how she came to receive a new life, and others came to know Jesus because of that interaction as well. There is good news wrapped up in these stories of the leper and the Samaritan. If you feel avoided or alone, Jesus does not avoid you if you call out to him. Now, Jesus was making a strong statement to his disciples by his actions that they should not be avoiding those avoided by others. Did you catch that? You know how it is, like sometimes, actions speak louder than words? So Jesus' actions were showing his disciples, no, this is the way it's done. You don't avoid the ones that others have been avoiding. Maybe there's someone that you've been avoiding. Even now, maybe God is bringing their name to your mind, and maybe God is asking you to reach out to them and avoid them no longer. I've quoted Mother Teresa several times this morning. Intense love does not measure, it just gives. So, how much does Jesus love us? Jesus said this much, and he reached out his arms and he died. That is an intense love that did not measure. How much does Jesus love me? Paul was so convinced of this love that he knew that nothing could separate him from it. He wrote in Romans chapter 8, verses 38 and 39, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither present nor future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." That's an intense love. We've come full circle, 2,000 years later. It's the same story, yet it's different. It's different people, yet the same. The response is always the same. It has never changed. Jesus reaches out in compassion and he says, "I'm willing." And if we call ourselves Christians, we have no option. This isn't an elective. We have no options if we call ourselves Christians to follow in his way and do the same. The worship team is going to be coming up, and they're going to be leading us in a song, "Mighty to Save." You can come up now. Wow, I'm really powerful. I can say that. Worship team, come on up. That wasn't scripted. Sorry. Okay, so as we sing this in a few minutes, make these words your prayer to God. Now, the song starts out, "Everyone needs compassion, a love that's never failing." That's everyone. Nobody is excluded. So think of the ones that you might be avoiding or the world avoids, or everyone needs compassion, a love that's never failing. I want to address 3 different groups of people, and I'm believing, as I've been praying, that God has already been talking to you. The first group of people is you have related to the leper. You feel isolated for whatever reason. You are bruised. Let God remind you this morning that he won't brush aside the bruised and the hurt, and he won't disregard the small and insignificant, but he'll steadily and he'll firmly set things right. Others may have avoided you, but Jesus does not avoid you. The second group of people I want to address is you've been so focused on your life that you haven't noticed those around you. Consider this. Who is the leper in your life? Who is the one that you intentionally or unknowingly have been avoiding? It may be that they might have even hollered, unclean, to keep you at arm's length. You know, the one that maybe is a little abrasive. They get angry when you talk to them. Maybe they're avoiding you. Maybe they annoy you. Maybe you just haven't noticed them. Jesus cared for people other people did not care for. He is willing to give you eyes to see and ears to hear. And I believe with all my heart, because I've seen this happen over again in my own life and in others, that he will give you creative ways to reach out to them. But you need to put your feet in action. If you're not moving, you're not going anywhere. And this third group of people I want to address is the bleeding hearts. You're the one that's already out there, and you have that heart of compassion, and you're meeting those needs, and everywhere you look, there are more needs, and you are tired. Jesus, the Son of God, knew it was important to take time to step back and care for himself. And you need to do the same. In closing, I want to leave this scripture with you. Romans chapter 10, verse 14. How can people have faith in the Lord and ask him to save them if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear unless someone tells them? That's so simple. I want to read it again. How can people have faith in the Lord and ask him to save them if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear unless someone tells them? And it's become a common phrase around the church, our God stories. And that's how simple it is. Your God story, your story where God just intervene and at that crossroads in your life, whatever it might be, and there's many of those crossroads throughout our journey. And as we share that, we're sharing life with others. You are imparting those words to give them hope, to give them a future. It's all up to us. It's not optional. It's our responsibility and it's our privilege. Let's all stand this morning. And I'm going to pray in a few minutes, but I'd like for us to sing the song, Mighty to Save, and to declare Jesus is indeed mighty to save.